Brought to you by Penguin.
A Foundling at the Wartime Bookshop by Lesley Eames. Read by Polly Edsell. Magna Story Sound presents an unabridged recording of A Foundling at the Wartime Bookshop, written by Lesley Eames and read by Polly Edsell. Prologue, April 1942. It was the dead of night, and sleep had smoothed its velvet hands across the heads of most young women in southern England, easing them gently into the sort of slumber that would leave them clear-eyed and refreshed come morning. But in the county of Hertfordshire, one young woman hadn't slept at all. Exhausted, shaken and ill, only her desperation drove her onwards. One part of the night's work was done, and so far no one knew of it. The other part remained to be accomplished, and no one could know of that either. With the clock ticking the available time away, she needed to act quickly, but stealthily. She'd planned for this moment. Normally she shared a bedroom, but, knowing she'd need privacy, she'd prepared the small room that opened off the kitchen. It was little more than a flimsy lean-to, chilly and damp, and used for storing tools, boots, a washing basket, and the like. Over the past weeks, she'd tidied it to create space for lying down if necessary, and hidden old newspapers, rags, sheets, and a cardboard box in there. Tonight, she'd added a pail of water, some clean clothing, and a couple of small blankets, which she'd cut from a larger blanket that was worn into holes. Cupping the water in her hands now, she washed her face and used wet rags to wash the rest of her, shuddering because the water was cold. But that couldn't be helped. She used more rags to dry and protect herself from further staining, then pulled on underwear, a long white nightdress, and her pale mackintosh. She'd covered the floor in old newspapers, which she bundled up and stuffed into a corner together with the sheets, which she hadn't managed to keep clean despite her best efforts. The box sat on the floor still, and she paused to consider its contents. But time was a luxury she couldn't afford. She needed to return from the second part of her night's work before dawn streaked pale fingers across the sky and stirred sleeping people into life. She eased open the door and listened. But all was quiet in the rest of the tumble-down house. Picking up the box, she crept into the kitchen, where she pushed her feet into her shoes and let herself out into the darkness. Only occasionally did moonlight gleam between clouds. This reduced the chances of her being seen, but meant she needed to choose her steps carefully if she wasn't to stumble. The soreness didn't help, but she pressed on with as much speed as she could manage. It was a walk she'd made many times before, but never in these circumstances, and she fretted at the thought of how long it was taking. For the most part, she walked past fields and woods, seeing nothing more than a slinking fox and a swooping white barn owl. But she tensed as she entered the outskirts of a village, her head moving from side to side to alert her to signs of people being up and about in the houses and cottages. A cat startled her when it jumped from a wall, and she clutched the box close, fearful of dropping it and harming the precious contents. "No time," she muttered, as the cat meowed for attention. She reached the far side of the village at last, and passed between tall gateposts. But here she hesitated. The drive was made from pale gravel that would crunch underfoot. She moved onto the lawn instead, though it was impossible to avoid the gravel for the final few yards. Tiptoeing over it, she finally arrived at the house and took the single step that led into a porch. It was a large, square porch with a sloping ceiling that rose to a central point. Enclosing it...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?